All right, we left off on page 228. We're going to go to the bottom of the page here on page 228. The second to last paragraph there, it says, well, Yahweh is allowing the tumult, the astonishment and the madness upon the armies of these nations that come up against Jerusalem. Okay? Now, Jerusalem has always been, they call it the Holy Land and so forth there, but it's always been a place that's been talked about. If you remember, King David took over that area, and from that time on, it's always held a significant place in the minds of people. But of course, Yeshua said in the last days that Jerusalem would be forgotten. The house of Yahweh, the real work of Yahweh, would be established here in America, in Texas, in Abilene. And that's, always cause a stumbling stone for many people because they don't really realize and understand the scriptures, and they're still looking for the Holy Land to be the place where all these prophecies are going to take place. Well, it is going to cause a lot of things being stirred up because Israel was a hated nation, and of course that's not the true Israelites, but it is a nation that is set forth right now among all the other nations. All together, everybody hates one another. But that is, of course, in and around the great river Euphrates is where all these things are, the prophecy is all centered, so to speak, to where all these things are going to take place within that area. So Yahweh is allowing these nations to actually destroy these armies when this time comes, and the fierceness of his judgment is the way they're going to look at it, because even though they call Yahweh this fierce, evil, mean God and so forth, they look upon it. But Yahweh's actually going to simply allow them and give them the desires of their heart. They want to fight, they want to kill, they want to be in war. Well, Yahweh says this is what you can have, and you're going to see the result of what it brings. Now, in Zechariah 14, verse 12, it says, and it will be a plague with which Yahweh will allow the people of the nations to strike themselves, those who fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh will consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes will consume away in their sockets, and their tongues will consume away in their mouths. When you think about this, this such thing as flesh-eating disease and stuff could be a part of this, but also, the severe effects from the radiation of the nuclear wars as well will do the same thing. In verse 15, and like the plague on man, so will the plague be on the horses and the mules and the camels and on the donkeys and whatever beast may be in those camps, the same plague. So even the livestock is going to be affected. And that's what Yahweh warns us about. Remember in Romans 8 that all creation is going to be affected by these things. Now when Yeshua was sent back by Yahweh back to this earth, Yeshua will have been crowned King of Kings and Ruler of Rulers, and Yeshua will have full power and authority to bring about a peaceful world. Now, it's really ironic for the fact that, to bring peace on this earth, they're going to have to be forced to do it. It's going to have to be a way of force. In their eyes, it's going to be force, and in Yahweh's eyes, it's just simply bringing forth his laws, to really bring them peace. So, Yeshua comes first to tread the winepress, and like it says in Revelation 19:15, and out of his mouth goes a sharp two-edged sword, that with it he should strike the nations. And the Christians look at this as being something like Star Wars, with their laser sabers, all of a sudden this big sharp sword comes out of his mouth and he turns his head and he chops everybody down, This is their mindset. This is how they draw the pictures and stuff of Revelations, because they don't have any comprehension of what he's talking about. They don't realize that the book of Revelation is written symbolically, but yet it explains itself. If you just read it for what it is and find the scriptures, it explains itself. So out of his mouth goes a sharp two-edged sword, that with it he should strike the nations. Again, it makes it sound like as if he's going to go in there and just tear them down, And he will rule over them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fierceness and the wrath of Almighty Yahweh. They make it sound so much like he's this mean, fierce God, because That's what the gods are. And so they liken Yahweh to just being one of the gods. And so they have him with a personality like the gods have. Now, you notice it says he's treading the winepress of the fierceness, okay, and the wrath. It's not of Almighty Yahweh, but this is of the nations. Remember, the winepress, treading the grapes. The grapes symbolizes the fruit of the nations. It's not the fruits of peace. It's the fruits that the nations are bringing forth. And this is what treading down the grapes of wrath is that by us bringing forth the message of peace, we're treading down those grapes of wrath, the fruits of the nations. We're bringing peace where the whole nations are full of wrath. And we know Yeshua and all the saints will return to earth to stand upon the Mount of Olives outside Jerusalem. It says towards the east. And this is the place exactly where Yahweh will execute this judgment here upon the nations. In Revelation 14:20, it says, and the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia. Now, to take that literally, you'd have to have this humongous wine press, and you have to have what? You take all the armies and dump them all in there, It's like as if they fight along the edge of it, and all of a sudden they fall inside of it or something, But this bloodshed, it's talking about the amount of bloodshed that's going to take place upon the earth. It's the death that's going to take place, So this blood, as it says, will flow outside the city of Jerusalem, where Yeshua will completely destroy the armies of this world by the sword that comes forth from his mouth. Now, he does do that, but it's not in the literal sense in which, the book is written, and that's what people don't understand. The Christian world has no concept of that. Revelations 19:7, it says, and I saw a Moloch standing in the sun. It's standing in defense of the sun, saying the benefits of sunlight and so forth. And remember, it talks about when soon the day of Yahweh, when it's going to become, that day is going to become dark and gloomy, where people are going to desire to see that sun out. And he cried with a loud voice, which he does have one, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather yourselves together to the supper of the great Father. Now here he is calling all these carnivorous birds to come and eat the flesh off of people. That's the way that they describe it here. This fowl, okay, it actually refers to something that's rising in the air. To rise or to rear up. It means a mountain, okay, as lifting up. So we know a mountain is a government and so forth. So this is symbolic of those governments are going to come together to fight this war. And they come together to gather themselves together as it says, to eat to the supper of the great Father. Now this is the same word, this word fowls, is the same word as birds that's in Revelations 18:2, when he talks about all the hateful birds that are there. It's the same word, because we know that the Vatican goes out and ruins all of these nations by influencing all of their nations and all the governments to do their bidding. So he says here in verse 18, that they may eat, and that word eat also means to devour. Devour the flesh of the kings, that's the leaders, of course, and the flesh of the captains, the military commanders, and the flesh of the mighty men, those are the soldiers and the ones underneath them. The flesh of the horses, that's the military equipment. Remember the prophet Yael, in Yael 2-5 talks about the horses and the military and stuff appearing to be as horses going through the land and so forth. And it says that, in front of it looks like the Garden of Eden. Behind it, it looks like it's a totally blackened area because it's totally destroyed. And that's what's going to take place in the end. When Yahweh said, the heathen will be ashes underneath our feet, that's exactly right, because that's the way the earth is going to be. It's going to be completely charred when all of the elements in the heavens begin to melt with fervent heat. That's the only thing that can be left is blackness and ash. And those who sit upon the horses, okay, in the flesh of all men, free and bond, small and great. Why? Because war has no respect of persons, Okay, war has no respect of persons. So he's talking about the small and the great, the free and the bond, and so forth. And I saw the beasts and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together. So notice, it's the beasts and the kings of the earth, as he has control over. Their armies are gathered together. Remember, the armies stand on his behalf, as Daniel said. They're gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Of course, the army there is the saints of Yahweh, and the one sitting on the horse there is Yeshua that it's referring to. And the rest were slain with the sword, which proceeds from the mouth of him who sat upon the horse, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. Okay? So the sword, of course, is war, and that battle there, refers to the fact that all the nations are going to fall, and Yeshua is going to set up the kingdom and take over. Now, Yahweh's will, of course, has been fulfilled by this time, and Yahweh's plan has been accomplished on this planet. Now, when it talks about verse 21 here, the sword and the comes from the mouth of him. This is the judgment. The judgment has come. His plan is fulfilled. Yahweh's plan is fulfilled, and mankind is learning his lesson of going his own way, which he should have never gone to begin with. Like we started off with that word pestilence there. I mean, that plague. That plague is a pestilence. It's the diseases in this world that inflicts a disease and makes it even worse, as that word, actually refers to. And the prophet Yirmiyah talks about that. Remember, he said that the diseases would get worse and worse and worse to where it would just get completely out of control. Okay, let's look at this seventh plague here now. You remember, pouring out the bowl. The bowl is the message, okay? It's a warning that goes forth from the seventh Moloch here. Revelation 16, verses 17 through 21, it says, "And the seventh Moloch poured out his bowl. He brought forth the message into the air." Okay, remember that word air means the firmament. You remember the real cause of global warming in June 2007 prophetic word started it all off. "And there came a great voice out of the house of heaven from the throne, saying, 'It is done.'" In other words, that's the last warning from heaven. Okay, when it says from heaven, it doesn't mean that it shouts out and you hear a voice coming down, but from heaven means inspiration from heaven comes down to men. "And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great." Now that's a little earthquake there that it's talking about, and it's going to be a tremendous earthquake that when it lets loose, the people of the world will know. "And it came to pass," it's kind of like that's the earth's last groaning, right before it finally ends, that the earth will quake. "And it came to pass that the great city was divided, remember, into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came into remembrance before Yahweh to give to her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath," it says, okay? But it's talking about that cup. Yirmiyah 51 talks about that cup and says that all the nations will receive of it and drink of it and so forth. And remember, it's talking about that great city that's divided into three parts. That is New York City is referring to there, as we saw in Volume 1. "And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found." Remember, that's when you look at the New York, it looks like a bunch of mountains and so forth from all the skyscrapers. Remember, the Apostle Yaakov had never seen these things, so he described these things in a manner in which it was put into his mind to write these things. Because you've got to remember, too, the book of Revelation can only be understood by the house of Yahweh. It's not understood by anybody else, because otherwise it would ruin the plan of Yahweh. Like Yahweh says in Prophet Isaiah, then, if people would understand, then his plan would not be able to be accomplished, because everybody would be called and everybody would have understanding. No one would learn, mankind would never learn this lesson. "And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every hailstone about the weight of a talent. And men blasphemed Yahweh because of the plague of the hail, for exceedingly great is the plague of it." Notice this great hail, okay? The largest recorded hail in the U.S. It was an 8-inch in diameter. 8 inches. And you think about that. That's the width of this piece of paper. Okay? And it was like 18.62 inches in circumference, but it weighed slightly less than 2 pounds. Okay? Now you figure something that huge, okay? Now what we're talking about here, something that big, okay? And yet that's only about 2 pounds of weight. What we're talking about here is this hail is so great that these hailstones are about the weight of a talent, okay? And a talent, depending upon what source you go to, can be anywhere from 60 to 95 pounds. That is going to be a tremendous amount of ice falling. And when that falls, you know what the damage does now in golf ball size, It can destroy a car very easily. Imagine when these huge things are coming down, okay? And when sometimes you see some of the hailstones, the hailstorms, by the time they go through, they will blanket the whole highway with hail, 6 inches thick, and they have to have the snow plows come out to clear off the road for the traffic to be able to drive on it. So you can imagine when these things begin to fall, when it says a great hail, it's talking about this tremendous destruction that's going to take place. Now remember, in Egypt, what was left of the crops was completely wiped out, right? Because the barley was in the green ear, so it was able to sprout. But everything else, the wheat and the rye and so forth, has been destroyed from the hail. And this is going to take care of a lot of different crops and a lot of different damage. In fact, the last hailstorm that we had, the last weather that we had, they had hail, and I remember them saying it wiped out hundreds and hundreds of acres of the wheat crop. They said it's not going to be producing because it wiped it out. And that's just a small taste of it. So he says, when one reads Revelation 16:7 from the King James Version, you don't really grasp the full meaning. In the emphatic diagram, it says, the seventh Malach poured out his bowl into the air, and there came a voice out of heaven from the throne saying, "It is done." But if you notice in the emphatic diglot, which is the Greek itself, it's the Greek version. You can't read that anyway because it's so small and blurred. But anyway, what it says is the seventh poured out the bowl of himself on the air, and came forth a voice great from the temple of heaven, from the throne, saying, "It has been done." Okay, it has been done. Because in most versions it just simply says it is done, but it has been done. Okay, so this point is overlooked and ignored, and it's brought a lot of confusion to understand these. But you got to realize that chapters 17 and 18 and 19, okay, when you read this, the English version seems like these things are yet to take place. Okay, but the seventh plague has already been poured out upon the earth, and so that's not true. By the time the seventh plague is finished, then all of these things that you see in Revelation 17, 18, and 19 have already been fulfilled. Okay, so they have taken place. So this will take place after those things have been done. Now this is the top of page 231. Now I'm using the newer version here because I don't know if anybody has the old version, but I think everybody pretty much has a new one. On the top of page 231, this first paragraph I wrote simply, wow, okay, because of what it says. Think about what this says. When the seventh Malach pours out his vial, it is to announce that all has been done. All the world now belongs to Yahweh. When the seventh Malach pours out his vial, it is to announce that all has been done. All the world now belongs to Yahweh. Brothers, you're going to hear those words brought forth by Yisrayl Hawkins. You see why you need to believe until the one sent? That's what he's talking about. Yisrayl Hawkins is going to bring forth these words and tell Yahweh. He's going to tell Yeshua. When Yeshua inspires him, he's going to say, it is done. Your people are ready. And that's when our deliverance is going to come. We're going to have a part in that and actually see that and hear those words brought forth. That's why I put wow on there, because it's so totally, it's mind-boggling to think that you're living in the time period when these things will be done, you know. If you realize the scriptures and you study the scriptures and you study the prophecies that talk about Yisrayl Hawkins, you will see that it says in Isaiah 49 that he is the one who brings salvation to the earth. No one else has ever done that, you know. He brings salvation to this earth. Yeshua Messiah died for our sins, and he is now the high priest of the house of Yahweh, waiting for us to come to perfection so that he can take his place where he needs to be. But this is going to be brought forth in our day. All the world now belongs to Yahweh. Now, after the time of Revelation 16:17, it says it has been done. It's really already it's a rehearsal of the things that have been done already. You know, it just like kind of lump sums it all in there. Now, Yahweh's judgment, of course, comes upon the great whore, the mother religion of all Christian churches, and that Catholic Church. You know, she stands so proud, you know, because she's got the whole world deceived. But she is following along with the governments of the people and by the people and against Yahweh, of course. Now, Revelations 19:1 and 2 shows clearly that Yahweh has taken the glory, the honor, and the power, and he has already judged the blood of his servants at her hand, you know. Because remember, it says the sentence is going to come. Okay, the whore will be sentenced. Okay, so her judgment is set because she's responsible for these things. Now, in Revelation 16:13 through 14, we found that there was unclean demons that came out of the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. And then we see in Revelation 19:20 that the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs before him, which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his likeness. And these things are, you know, they're going to be cast into the lake of burning with fire and brimstone. Now, we find this beast, this government, that's by the people and of the people, and of course against Yahweh, because it's not for the people, but it's against Yahweh. You are already cast into the lake of fire, already burned up. Remember Revelation 17:16-7 talks about how the Rome will be burnt and so forth. So we find this false prophet, this religious leader of this deceived Christian world, who of course is the Pope, was already cast into the lake of fire to be burnt with the beast, right? And so the two are taken, and when Yeshua returns with his army, all these armies that come against him, of course, they're not going to be able to stand up, but they're going to fall. Revelation 19:20, we know that the dragon is the deceiver of the world, and it talks about the dragon in Revelation 12, verse 9, because it says, the great dragon which was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. They deceive the whole world. Now, you know that the Pope gave a directive in June 2008 not to call upon the name of Yahweh, right? To get rid of it in all these churches. This is a letter to the bishops of the conferences on the name of God. And you see there all of this writing, right? Now, this is what they're saying here that it is. It says, by the directive of the Holy Father, in accord with the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, this, you got it underlined there, this congregation of the divine worship and the discipline of the sacraments deems it convenient to communicate to the Bishops' Conference the following things in regards to the translation of the name of God. Okay? What I found very interesting here is, right, You notice how it says, Congregation for Divine Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments. You see up in here? That's what this is, right? Congregations of there's divine, of the disciplines of the sacraments. Check out that word. It's cult. But yet they call it what? Oh, it's worship, right? It's worship. And yet they call us a cult, right? So you can see how sneaky and crafty these guys are, man. In this article here, this is something else, because it talks about notwithstanding, there's clear room in recent years that the practice has crept in of pronouncing the God of Israel's proper name. And that's what they always say. It's God's name. You look in all the dictionaries, encyclopedias, Bible dictionaries, encyclopedias, they'll tell you the God of Israel, his name was, and then they'll say, they may have Yahweh there, but they'll say that it's God's name, and it's not. Known as the holy and divine tetragrammaton with its 4 consonants of the Hebrew letters. YHWH. And it says, the practice of vocalizing is met with both in the reading of biblical texts taken from the lectionary as well as in prayers and hymns, and it occurs in diverse written and spoken forms, such as, for example, Yahweh. And then they also have Yahweh, spelled with a J, and Jehovah, and so forth. It is therefore our intention with this present letter to set out some essential facts which lie behind the above-mentioned norm, and to establish some directives to be observed in this matter. And then it goes on and it says, as an expression of the infinite greatness and majesty of God, it was held to be unpronounceable. Now, here's the Creator, and he tells you, I am Yahweh. That is my name. Don't worship any gods. And yet he's not going to tell us his name, how to pronounce it. We don't know how to pronounce the name of the Creator when he says, you must call upon me for salvation's sake. It's such a crock, but the people can't see that. They don't understand it. They really believe that the name can no longer be pronounced, or it was unpronounceable. And hence it was replaced during the reading of the sacred scriptures by means of the use of an alternate name, Adonai, which means Lord. But this is some amazing stuff here. Now, I put on here how clever to deceive the congregations, Genesis 3, verse 1, where it says, be evil like the gods, The Greek translation of the Old Testament, so-called Septuagint, going back to the last centuries, prior to the Christian era, had regularly rendered the Hebrew tetragrammaton with the Greek word Kyrios, which means Lord. Since the text of the Septuagint continued in the Bible of the first generation of Greek-speaking Christians, in which language of the books of the New Testament were also written, these Christians, too, from the beginning, never pronounced the divine tetragrammaton. Something similar happened, it says, with the Latin-speaking Christians and so forth, that the literature began to emerge from the 2nd century. And they're already covered beyond the 1st century and beyond, above that, right? So now they say also it continued with the 2nd century, all right? And then it says the same holds true for the Neo-Vulgate, which the church uses in the liturgy, okay? So they're telling you here that the Greeks, it wasn't, in Christianity, they didn't use the name Yahweh, which is true. But this is what's so subtle right here. It says the fact, now remember, they're writing to the bishops to tell and explain to the bishops, don't use the name of Yahweh. This fact had important implications for the New Testament Christology itself, when in fact St. Paul, with regard to the crucifixion, writes that, quote, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name. Philippians 2, verse 9. Okay? Now notice what they're saying. They're saying that God has given him a name which is above every name. He does not mean any other name than Lord, for he continues by saying, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Philippians 2:11. And then he also says, compare Isaiah 42, verse 8. I am the Lord, that is my name. Because remember, they already took the name out. So if someone, this is so slick. Because if you pick up a Bible, you're not going to find Yahweh's name. But you will find Lord and God. So I remember one time Jehovah's Witnesses came over to my house. And, they were trying to say, they were reading the scripture. The name is, this was before I didn't have the book of Yahweh, but I had a holy name version, which had the name of Yahweh in it. So they get to a point and they say, Jehovah. And I said, no, that's not his name. Jehovah. No, that's not his name. What is it? It's Yahweh. You know that. Well, yeah, but see, it says here Jehovah. I said, not mine. I read it to him and it says Yahweh. I said, what? Let me see that. Showed it to him, but we got to go. And they took off, and they never showed up again, because the name of Yahweh was right there in the scriptures, and they couldn't deny it, So here we see that it has Lord and God, and they use these verses. Notice that it says, every tongue that confesses that Jesus Christ is Lord, okay, then you're doing right. Because that's what the Bible says, right? It says Jesus Christ is Lord. So what's wrong with using Lord? So you see how they push it into the mind. It says the title, in fact, becomes interchangeable between the God of Israel and the Messiah of the Christian faith, even though it is not, in fact, one of the titles used for the Messiah of Israel. So they plainly tell you that Lord is not one of the titles, but yet what do you find in the Catholic Church, in the Catechism? It's throughout the prophetic words in the newsletters, right? In there it says that they use Lord, that is how Jesus Christ would be referred to, as Lord. So he says, they go on the right, it says, even though it's not one of the titles used for the Messiah of Israel, it is strictly a theological, it is in the strictly theological sense. This title was found, for example, already in the first canonical gospel. Compare Matthew 1, verse 20, when it says, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. And that's true. When they read the Bible, they're going to find these things. So they can take these scriptures and lay one upon the other. And with people not knowing any better, if they see Lord and God in those scriptures, they're going to believe what the Catholic Church is teaching them, keeping them in deception. And then it says, the word of the Lord abides forever in Isaiah 40, verse 8. And then it says, however, in the properly Christological sense, apart from the text cited in Philippians 2, verses 9 through 11, we can remember Romans 10:9. Romans 10:9, remember what it says? If you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe with all of your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Now, how much craftier can you get than what Satan did with that? Pulling the wools over the people's eyes. Because if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord, and no other greater name than was given to him than Lord, and Lord refers to Jesus Christ, the people are they're whamsacked, man. They're totally blinded. They're totally blinded. That is so clever that you definitely see how subtle Satan is and how crafty she is. Like it says, remember that she was wiser than Daniel? To use something like this, it just blows them away. And then, of course, they use this verse here, that no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. Now, if you put the correct reading in there, you know what this is saying. But when people don't know and they read their Bibles, they see this, and you can see how they literally believe it, because the scripture does say you can't say that. You can't claim he's Lord except by the Holy Spirit. So if you say that Jesus is the Lord, you got to have the Holy Spirit, right? Or Holy Ghost, as they say in the King James Version. So you see how subtle and crafty they use this material to put this into people's minds to deceive them. And this is why the scripture says in Revelation 12:9, Satan has the whole world deceived. Okay? Now it also says that avoiding pronouncing the tetragrammaton of the name of God on the part of the church has therefore its own grounds. Apart from the motive of purely theological order, there is also that of remaining faithful to the church's tradition, and from the beginning that the sacred tetragrammaton was never pronounced in the Christian context nor translated into any of the languages in which the Bible was translated. Yeah, and they had 1,500 years to make sure that that was done sufficiently. So they plainly tells you that according to the church's tradition, Christianity has never used the name Yahweh. Okay? So, therefore, the final part of this letter is, in the directives, in the light of what we have seen in these following directives, to be observed that 1, in liturgical celebrations and songs and prayers, the name of God in the form of the tetragrammaton, YHWH, is neither to be used or pronounced. Then it goes on and talks about how the tetragrammaton, if you come across it, is to be rendered by the equivalent of Adonai or Kyrios, Lord. And Adonai is to be translated Lord, and if the form of God is to be used with the tetragrammaton, then you're supposed to use the word God. That is so incredibly deceptive that it just pulls the wool over the eyes of the people. It's amazing. And they believe it because everybody, if they read their Bible, and a lot of people do read their Bible. They don't really understand it, but they do read their Bible. So if they pick up the Bible, that's why you can talk to somebody and they say something and say, well, the Bible doesn't say that. And they're right. The Bibles don't say that. But the word of Yahweh says it, And that's where the big deception comes from. Okay, on page 232. It's because of the dragon's deceit now that mankind accepts the mark of the beast. So you can see there what we just covered. If they read these things and believe it with all their heart, then they accept the mark of the beast. And they worship God. And that's the reason why it's brought itself to the point to where Yahweh has allowed the destruction of almost every God-worshiping man on the face of this earth. Now, at the end of the 7th plague, we're going to see mankind is still deceived and still unrepentive and still blasphemes Yahweh, as you see in Revelation 16:21. The great hail falls, but they still blaspheme Yahweh because of the plague, like as if he's the cause of it, when it's their sins that have caused this. Now, you got to remember, okay, when, we had an instance that time when the hailstorms came through and did $400 million worth of damage in Abilene. That was the taste to show the Christian world here in Abilene that God doesn't save them. That God doesn't listen to their prayers because they were praying for rain. And then they get something like this. When the people, and they mess up the firmament. Now, the firmament is going to get so incredibly messed up. And think about it. A stone that size falling from the heavens. When hail is formed, a drop of rain one drop of water takes I think it's a million molecules or whatever come together for these things. But the raindrops falls, and then the wind current picks it up. Now, and every time it does that, it refreezes it, and it picks up more and collects more and more and more. Can you imagine the coldness and the wind currents that are going to take place up in the heavens to be able to cause a hailstone the size of this podium? Can you imagine what's going on up there to be able to cause something to form like that and then to fall with the velocity that it's going to fall? It's unbelievable, the damage and things that it's going to do. But the thing is, what's even more devastating is the fact that the firmament is so screwed up that it can't even fall a drop of rain, that it's got to do this to the earth. because of man's damnable sin, because of the mark of the beast that they accept. And that's what you got to think about. We all have to think about when we sin, that's what we're bringing upon this earth. Maybe that will help us realize it a little bit. But you think about the destruction that's taking place. The world doesn't want to be that way. You know, the microbes don't want to have to suffer. But it's the sin that's causing it all. So we see here that mankind's gone through this fire of Yahweh's judgment. He's allowed this to take place. The lake of fire is there, the nuclear wars. He's allowed the curses for sin to come upon mankind as prophesied. And the man now is more precious than fine gold. And mankind is few in number. Of course, after this great devastation remains as humanity. You remember with gold, it takes from 1 ounce of gold, it can take anywhere from 2 to 90 tons of ore just to produce 1 simple ounce of gold. So mankind is rarer than gold. At the end of the 7th plague, we see that what the prophet Zechariah has said in Zechariah 13, verse 9, and I will bring the 3rd part through the fire, and I will refine them as silver is refined, and I will try them as gold is tried. Notice, there's refining and there's trying. Okay? Silver, you melt it 7 times and the dross and everything comes up to the top, and you have to scrape it off and redo it and melt it and scrape off the dross and remelt it, and you keep doing it until eventually everything comes up to the top, and once it's all clean, then it's nice and pure at that time. And just like gold is tried in the fire, it's melted to purify itself. You have to melt all of this ore down to get the pure gold that is there. And gold, pure gold, is very, very malleable. That's why all jewelry is mixed in. There's no pure gold on the market like that because it's too soft. So you have to mix it in with other metals to be able to form the jewelry and stuff to be able to hold up. Remember the old Western days when they'd have a piece and they'd put it in their teeth, bite down on it, see if it was soft? Because they knew that if it was real gold, it was going to be soft. But this remnant of humanity will not be deceived much longer, because this prophecy is going to come to pass. Where Yahweh says in Zechariah 13:9, he says, they're going to call with my name, and I'm going to hear them. And I will say, this is my people, and they're going to say, Yahweh is my Father. Yahweh is my Father. Now, chapter 15 here, this is talking about Satan being bound. It says, through the eyes of prophecy, we brought it through the time period when the 2 witnesses begin their work. The temple was built. The 7-year covenant is made. Satan is cast out of heaven in the mist and tries to stop the work of Yahweh that's protected by Yahweh. Of course, in the last 3.5 years, nuclear war rages on, the Great Tribulation ends, and the 7 last plagues are prophesied come to pass. Now remember, the temple is going to be rebuilt. Don't worry about these things. Yahweh's going to take care of his prophecies, okay? We don't have to be concerned about these things. Yahweh's going to bring to pass everything that he said. He's already told you that before. If you believe all that the prophets have spoken. The prophet Isaiah said that nothing proceeds forth out of the mouth of Yahweh except it brings to pass what he said. Okay, it doesn't return back to him void. In Revelation 19:20, and the beast was captured with him, the false prophet, okay, and everybody who was deceived, who has received the mark and worship his likeness, these both were cast into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. Now, at this very time, the beast and the false prophet have been burned up, but we also find that Satan has not yet been restrained at the end of the battle, okay? She's going to be restrained. She will be, and she will be restrained for those 1,000 years, as Yahweh says, because that's the only way that the earth will be able to have peace. Now we find that mankind has gone through the fire, and that man's more precious than fine gold. Mankind's few in number, because the earth, this planet is just going to be completely devastated. And what remains of humanity is still deceived because of the very fact that Satan hasn't been let loose yet. Hasn't been restrained yet. Now, throughout the history of the world, there's never been peace on earth. Even when it's identified in the scriptures as the Holy Land of Israel. there's never had peace for more than a few years at a time. That's it. That was during the time of Solomon. That's the only time. And that was only, it had to be under the leadership of Yahweh's leaders. And, of course, when Solomon went the wrong way, then, of course, his kingdom began to fall apart, too. But there is a way, of course, that all the world can have peace, but, they can have perfect health, perfect joy, abundant living. But that way to peace, of course, has been hidden from mankind for almost 6,000 years. But world leaders today, they don't know the way to peace. Church leaders are blinded. Even the government and the religious leaders now reigning in the Holy Land are far removed from the knowledge that will one day bring peace to this earth. These religious leaders and the church leaders, they don't know what's going on. They're all caught up into deception. I want to read you something here. It says, Vatican Jewish Museum launched first joint exhibit on the menorah. Now, we know the menorah stands for the work of Yahweh. But the Vatican and the Jewish Council, the Jewish community in Rome, are now marking a new step in relations between the two religions by rolling out the first ever joint exhibition focused entirely on the menorah, an ancient symbol representing their shared roots, so they say. The menorah, we know what the menorah stands for in the work of Yahweh. As that work, and it's always brought forth the light. Now, the Jews in the Catholic Church, they always have, they call them the interfaith relations and so forth. They always, say that they're working together, okay? And this is what this is talking about. But I want you to show you how clever Satan is again, because what it says, this means that we must know the Jewish roots of Christianity. Well, only the house of Yahweh knows the Jewish roots of Christianity, right? Because we know what the Jews are, Yada. Jew is itself is a corrupted word that they're too ignorant to even realize that they call themselves by a name that Satan gave them to begin with. Well, remember the Yadaim, the tribes of Yada, now rule in the Vatican, but they're too ignorant. The people in Israel, the Jews, the so-called Jews throughout the world, don't even realize that that's their brothers that are ruling in the Vatican. But they try and make it sound like it's something totally distinct, like as if Judaism and Christianity is two different things. He said, adding in the sense that it's very important to know the roots, the family roots of Christianity. A menorah is a 7-lamp candelabra made from pure gold and was used by Moses in the desert. According to the book of Exodus, God asked Moses to create the candelabra and put it in the temple in Jerusalem to mark it as a sacred space. Ricardo, the chief rabbi of Rome, he said that the exhibit is a small but important example of how Catholics and Jews can work together for a better world. Now that's a mockery. That's a mockery to Yahweh, because they can't make a better world. They're not going to make a better world. Only the laws of Yahweh will make the world better. He says, quote, the menorah is a Jewish symbol, not a Christian symbol, but the Christians use this symbol and work with it in many ways, he said, calling it a symbol of the connection between the new religion of Christianity and its Jewish roots. Well, it's not the roots of the apostles. It's not the roots of Yeshe. It's the roots of Christianity. And the Yadaim, of course, the tribe of Yada, who fell away from Yahweh, didn't follow the example of the tribes of Israel, then they went into the same course, and then this new religion of Christianity was formed from those who had fallen away and had Egypt in their hearts. Part of what's called in the exhibit is the connection between what they call old and what they call new. Now remember, when you think of these things and think of Christianity, they have the Old Testament, they have the New Testament, right? And even in the Catholic, the Catholic Catechism, remember they talk about Jesus will be known new, everything would be made new, and that he would be known as the new God with the name and be called Lord. So the problem is how to relate this old symbol, he said, adding to the discovery of this story and put it in an exhibition is very interesting, because by itself it is the history of the relationship between Christianity and the Jews. Menorah's got nothing to do with that. If you remember, when the Israel nation came about, the Zionist movement and so forth, those who know more of the scriptures wanted the menorah to stand for Israel, you know. They wanted it on their flag and so forth. But what did they end up getting? They ended up getting the Star of God, right? The Star of David on their flag. And of course, that was by the rich people who did that and funded it all and so forth. But the exhibit titled Menorah, Worship, History, and Legend will be shown simultaneously at both the Jewish Museum as well as the museum in the Vatican. And by the way, that's located on the left colonnade in the St. Peter's Square if you want to go there and see it, okay? So notice, it would include roughly 130 pieces, including the menorah from different periods and depictions of them in paintings, and I knew darn well they'd have something in there, and the sarcophagi, okay? You know what that is? That's coffins, man. Coffin. How could a Catholic Church get away from worshiping the dead, right? They got to go after the coffins. Sculptures in medieval and Renaissance paintings and manuscripts. The works displayed will include pieces from the 1st century up to the modern time century. From the 1st century to modern times. Now, how is this Catholic Church supposed to be Christianity, and yet it's got pieces of the menorah and all of these things dating all the way back there, right? During the presentation, attention also turned to speculation as to the current whereabouts of the solid gold menorah taken from the temple in Jerusalem by the Romans during their siege in 70 A.D., but which has gone missing for the past 1,500 years. That sounds like something you'd have read out of the House of Yahweh literature, isn't it? He says the menorah was originally taken from Jerusalem when its temple was destroyed by the Roman general Titus, who became emperor 9 years after that victory. However, despite the various theories, the chief rabbi, Ricardo, he said, nobody knows what has happened since it disappeared from Jerusalem. There's a lot of theories, they say, but nobody really knows. Well, present at this exhibit instead will be the ancient Magdala stone, which is found in 2009. And it says, but regardless of the legends, the rabbi said, it will be very interesting to see how people will visit, what they would say, and how they will be impressed. The reaction of the public is also important, he said. We are waiting for this moment. Now, why would they be so concerned about the way that people receive these things? Because just think, they're building up to the point when the Catholic Church is going to be able to take these relics, which they have already, that came from Rome, from the temple, right? And are stored in Rome. When they are able to present this and say, now the temple can be restored and so forth, the reaction of the public is what they're looking for. If people will flock to these exhibits and take great interest in it, they'll know, hey, now's the time to start getting ready to get this stuff out, okay? Remember, we already know what prophecy says. We know the prophecy is going to be fulfilled, but Yahweh gives us these glimpses of these things, but only the house of Yahweh can figure out what's going on behind the scenes. The rest of the people are ignorant. They really don't even know what's going on, but we do. So I thought that was rather interesting, especially when he used the menorah, you know, which symbolizes the work of Yahweh. But they try and say, oh, this doesn't have nothing to do with the work of Yahweh. We're not even supposed to pronounce that name. In fact, that name is unpronounceable. However, you know, this menorah does talk about the roots of Christianity and Judaism. So let us talk about these things, and let us keep you deceived into the world. And remember, either you worship Yahweh or you worship Satan. That's it. There's no in between. And he goes on and he says, the days of peace are not too far in the future. But in this chapter, the Mark of the Beast series, we'll find just how peace will start and engulf the earth and just after the battle of the great day of Yahweh. But we find why this world cannot possibly have any peace as long as Satan is allowed to remain free. Here it says the truth of Satan's deception. Deception from Satan is known throughout the Scriptures. In fact, one of the first truths one learns when Yahweh begins to open the human mind to understanding is the fact that all the world is spiritually blinded. You know, when Yahweh flips on that switch in the person's mind, and then they realize that, wow, there is nothing but lies that's out there, you know. And they were spiritually blinded. They didn't have any understanding. But when you come to Yahweh's house with a humble attitude to learn and to know, and then your mind is opened and you begin to have that understanding, then you realize that you've come out of the spiritual blindness. Now notice this next paragraph. Spiritually blind people. Spiritually blind people are blind to seeing the joy in obeying the laws of Yahweh. They're blind to seeing the harm that mankind has brought in bringing and will continue to bring upon himself by continually disobeying the laws of Yahweh. They can't see that. Their minds are blinded. Get that in your head. Their minds are blinded. We are not blinded. We can see. We have the eyes to see. Remember, Yahweh said, blessed are those who see and those who hear. This world is not that way. Don't take these things for lightly when you read this. You should be jumping up in joy when you meditate upon these things, when you pray to Yahweh and you think about the great blessing that there is, that he opened your mind, that you're in the house of Yahweh in these last days, because you're going to see that part come to pass when Pastor will say, they're ready. Yeah, sure, you can come now, because he's going to give the word. Remember that. We want to be here and we want to see those things come to pass. So we see here that they're blind. They're blind to the fact that what it's brought 6,000 years. They're blind to the fact of what it will bring. Otherwise, you know, if man was allowed to continue on, even though you could show them all we're going to show them all the history of mankind and what it's brought. But even though you show them all of this, and then show them that, you know, if you continue in this, it's going to continue and get worse and worse and worse and worse. And even if they had that understanding and saw it right there in front of them, they would still want to continue on. They wouldn't change. Okay? So this is why Yahweh has to step in. And this is why Yeshua will step in and set up the kingdom. And this is why we, the saints of Yahweh, will open their minds and give them this understanding. So he says, they don't understand what's brought, what's bringing, and will continue to bring upon himself by continually disobeying the laws of Yahweh. And this rings true from the health laws, which bring suffering through disease and sickness. And when these laws are ignored, the more severe heartache and even bloodshed due to the breaking of the moral laws. You know, they don't understand what they eat is destroying them. And they're destroying the whole earth by what they do. Their sins cause the problems with the intelligent people getting the GMOs out there on the market and just spreading the stuff throughout all the whole earth. And there's wind currents that blow all over the earth, you know, and we know what they do, so therefore this stuff is out there. But they eat the wrong things. They eat those things that are forbidden. They eat the things that are not meant to be food for mankind. And it causes all the suffering, the sickness, the diseases. But they're too blind to see these things. They don't understand that the suffering's coming from their disobedience and breaking the moral laws, even to the point to where they can get to where they can murder a child, call it abortion, and you think there's nothing wrong with it. Just go out and do what you want to do, send the woman over, and just let her kill the baby. And that's okay. That's okay. Even the stupid, damnable Christian preachers will get up there and say, it's okay. That's the mindset that this world's gotten to. That's what we're going to get rid of. That's what we're going to get rid of. That's why you're studying here tonight, going through these words, to realize this is your job, brothers. This is your job, to get this in your head, deep in your heart, to realize why you're in the house of Yahweh. You're not just here to come to services on Sabbath. You know, that's hard enough for some people, seem like to do, to get here on time. But you're here to learn a way of life so that you can bring peace to this earth, peace to everybody else. You know, we take for granted the peaceful solution. How simple it is, right? Bring peace. And that's why right now, the world can't understand it, and they read it and they think, well, that sounds corny, man. Yeah. Be morally correct, and you're going to bring peace to someone else's life. This 44 I got on my side right here, that's what's going to bring peace. Somebody mess with me. You know, that's their mindset. But when Yahweh opens the mind, and you begin to see the power of Yahweh, and you're going to go out and you're going to teach the peaceful solution to the nations, they're going to be flabbergasted. Their minds are going to be opened at that time. And then they're going to accept the peaceful solution, and they're going to fall down at your feet, crying and begging, saying, as Limmuwdyah said, surely our fathers have inherited nothing but lies. And they're going to be eager to learn that peaceful solution, because they're going to realize that something so simple, written in the laws of Yahweh, to love your neighbor as yourself, can actually be done. And there's not a person on the earth, and not a creature on earth or throughout the universe, that doesn't want to enjoy life. But that's what we're going to be doing. May Yahweh bless you, man. We're going to stop here on page 235. Ask the leaders. Han can take off there next week.